Okay, so the question is, why do priests wear all black with a white collar? This is probably a favorite question of school children everywhere when their priest comes to visit their classroom. Why do you wear that all the time? In fact, I had my nephew, when he was growing up, there's a certain point I would come over to see them and very often be in my clerical collar. And at a certain point, I think when he was 5 or so, he looked at me and he said, "Why do you wear that shirt all the time?" So he thought I was just wearing the same shirt over and over and over again. But yes, it's a very distinctive aspect of the priesthood is our dress. And actually the history of how we got to this point, where this is pretty standard, a clerical suit with a collar, it's pretty long and complex and kind of controverted, the history of clerical vesture. Clerical dress. It actually seems that in the first 3-4 centuries of the church's life, Christian ministers, ordained ministers, priests, bishops, did not have any particular distinctive dress. They actually dressed the same as everyone else in the society. Occasionally you'll hear of some bishops or priests saying that they should wear the toga, which was what like Greek philosophers wore, kind of distinctive dress. But generally speaking, they wore exactly what everyone else wore. It was only actually after the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the influx of a lot of the Germanic tribes, where a lot of people started wearing pants, for instance, that the clergy, especially of the clergy of Rome, which is always kind of a very traditional local church, they kept the old Roman vesture. So they had a long tunic, generally, that they would continue to wear. And it's about this time that you start getting legislation from the church or orders from the church about how Christian ministers should not dress the same way as the lay people in the secular world. Eventually, that long tunic usually became the color black. Into the Middle Ages, even later Middle Ages, became most commonly black. Why? Because it was the cheapest dye. So then when we get into even just the last couple centuries, priests would normally be wearing the cassock, especially in the Latin West. And where did the white collar come from then? Well, actually, it's kind of mundane. All men just kind of wore a starched tall white collar, whether they were laymen or priests. And so that was kind of common to have a tall white collar, and then the priests would wear the cassock over it. So when you get to something like this, what I'm wearing, it's actually meant to just mimic the look of a cassock over a starched white collar. And in fact, the type of collar that I have, which is, I can take this off, I can detach this collar, was invented just in the 19th century by a Protestant minister, actually, a very kind of enterprising, ingenious Protestant minister. So the long and the short of it is it was effectively a gradual process in which the church, reflecting on the nature of the priesthood, wanted her priests to be dressed simply and visibly. That's what it all comes down to, is simplicity and visibility. The church constantly had to exhort her priests, don't wear all the fancy clothes as the rest of people in society. I mean, this goes back even to when Jesus sends out his apostles on their first mission. He says, don't take a second tunic. He wants them to be poor. He wants them to depend totally upon him and not upon their own resources. So the church always exhorts her priests to dress simply, and that's part of the black, and the same shirt and vesture every day is very simple and expresses poverty. But also there's a visibility to it. This is part of why the church wants her priests to dress differently than the laity, is so that they are known to be priests, so that people can approach them and seek out God. You know, when I first started wearing clerical clothing as a priest, and especially in the airport and on airplanes, it acts as a kind of like magnet for people, and they come and they want to talk about God immediately. or I've even been approached by people in public places to hear their confessions. So that's another big part of it. So in many ways, it's kind of a mundane history, and we put spiritual significance onto things that arose in a kind of organic way. The black being death to self, death to the world, the white being the light of Christ that enters into the world. But in the end, it's all about simplicity and visibility.